My name is Emmy Rodriguez. I am the manager of the Environment Program for GFDD. We are a nonprofit organization which is dedicated to the advancement of global collaboration and exchange. With offices here in New York, Washington, D.C., and Santo Domingo, the foundation conducts research, enhances public understanding, and offers capacity building in the areas crucial to the social, economic, and sustainable development of the Dominican Republic and the region. GFDD creates, facilitates, and implements international human development projects building on its own experience, expertise, and strong national and international networks. In this regard, we are grateful and give thanks to our long-standing partners, such as the Permanent Mission of the Dominican Republic to the United Nations, for making this event possible, as well as the support from the United Nations Environment Program, Committee on NGOs, and the Earth Day Network. We are very honored to be able to have with us here today noted oceans expert, award-winning journalist, filmmaker, adventurer, and 6-time grantee of the National Geographic Expeditions Council, Mr. John Bowermaster. John has dedicated his life to traveling and documenting rarely seen corners of the world. In doing so, he challenges our perception that vast remote places are immune to our actions. His films reveal instead that places like Antarctica are in fact fragile ecosystems, threatened by regional warming and loss of sea ice, all linked to rising global levels of carbon dioxide. On this Earth Day, GFDD recognizes the power the medium of film holds, providing an effective platform for civil society to engage and raise awareness on key environmental issues. With this in mind, before I leave you with John Bowermaster, who will be introducing his film, I invite you to stay after the screening for a panel discussion on climate change and sea level rise, with His Excellency Ambassador Ahmed Sarir of the Permanent Mission of Maldives to the UN, and Mr. Jamil Ahmad, Deputy Director of UNEP, New York. Please welcome John Bowermaster.
I want to encourage you all to come down front. The room is too big. Everybody's happy? Yeah, and let's not be so formal. My only small regret is that when we walked into the room, each of the little LED panels was lit up with a different country name. I wish those were still on, because then you could choose which country you wanted to sit behind. But relevant to what we're going to watch tonight, the one name, I'm going to guess if you UN experts will be able to tell me how many member nations of the UN today? How many different countries? 208? 193. So ostensibly there are 193 different names in here, but the one name, the one country, actually continent you won't see listed here is Antarctica, because it's the one place in the world that is represented successfully by international treaty. Now, as we said beforehand, it's a little easier to run a place successfully by international treaty when no one lives there. So there's no squabbles, there's no people. But it is a really great example of how countries can get along, and we can talk a little bit more about the treaty afterwards. Really, I hesitate to say too much. I really just want you to look at the film. This is something, I've been to Antarctica since 1989. I've been a couple dozen times, and this film is kind of the most recent piece of journalism I've done. I've done lots of writing. I've written a book. I've made a previous film about Antarctica. So I know it pretty well, but it's a place that's constantly changing, constantly evolving. Who's been to Antarctica? 1, 2, okay. But you guys are good travelers, so I encourage all of you to go if you can, because it truly is life-changing. The other thing I thought I'd comment on before we start, though, is that this is Earth Day. This is the 44th anniversary of Earth Day. I'm thrilled to be here as part of that. I have actually a really interesting relationship with Earth Day. I've had a lot of projects be associated with it. I did a book that was published in 1990, so that would have been, literally it was published on the 20th anniversary of Earth Day, called Saving the Earth. really great treatise on at that time, the 14 biggest environmental issues in the world, the causes, effects, and solutions. But I have to say I get a little bummed out every Earth Day because I page through the table of contents and I look at how we're doing. And in regard to those 14 issues, on 13 of them, we're not doing so well. Actually, things have gotten worse. The one where we have made a difference regarded which in 1990 seemed to be a huge problem, was chlorofluorocarbons. Remember those? They were the result of aerosol spray cans and styrofoam and things, which were opening this sizable ozone hole above Antarctica and creating all sorts of problems. The world community actually got together and banned chlorofluorocarbons, and the ozone hole issue has improved. Again, a suggestion that when international treaties can be enforced, they work. And then 4 years ago on Earth Day, I had another book published. This one was called Oceans, and it was a companion book to a big $100 million documentary made by the Frenchman Jacques Perrin. And it gave me the opportunity to talk about my concerns and have others contribute to this book about their concerns about the ocean. And on that same day in 2010, so 4 years ago, we were finishing a film I made about the relationship between man and water in Louisiana. And literally, as we were finishing the film, we were literally editing the film on these dates 4 years ago, the 20th, 21, 22 of April, and when the Deepwater Horizon exploded, and we went back to Louisiana and made a completely different ending to the film. So I do have this long and kind of complicated relationship with Earth Day, and I just wanted to remind myself and you that I was very, very happy to be here today. So on that, we'll watch this very fun film. Unfortunately, it is a big, beautiful 3D movie. And tonight we're seeing it in big, beautiful 2D. So I think you'll still get the potential for it in 3D. But it starts screening in museums and science institutions around the world starting this fall. So look forward at your local museoplex. So thank you very much for coming.
Okay, so John, if you don't mind, first, we'd like to thank you on behalf of GFDD for allowing us to share this visually stunning but also very important film with the audience here tonight. It's given us a lot to think about because there are a lot of different themes included in this film. But to begin with, could you just please maybe tell the audience a bit more about what brought you to the project and what you plan to do going forward?
You guys seem very far away. Well, what brought me to the project again is, I went there for the first time in 1989. It was my first assignment for National Geographic. I didn't know much about Antarctica, and I've been back a couple times since. I think just as we're watching the Arctic change and the Greenland change and the impacts the change in those places are having on the rest of the world, I think, are extremely important, but I think it's not too early to start turning our eye to also think about Antarctica in the same regard, in regard to climate change. The tricky thing about Antarctica is that it's huge. You saw that map. The United States could fit inside Antarctica easily. And I warn people all the time, do not generalize, because I never say that Antarctica is warming. Because actually it's a huge continent. Parts of Antarctica are actually getting colder. But that thin peninsula, that 900-mile long peninsula, is warming faster than anywhere else on the planet. And there's a lot of ice there. We live here in the northeast of the United States, where we have winters with lots of snow and ice, and we all know what those first few days of spring are like that arrive with a lot of rain. And that lingering ice and snow melts very fast. And that's what's happening in the peninsula now. When it used to precipitate and snow, it's now precipitating and raining. And rain is really, really hard on ice. So we went back in January of 2012 with 3D cameras. But you've all seen IMAX films, right? And there's one key word in IMAX film is that it's actually shot on film. Big 70-millimeter film, but with the advance of technology, we're now able to create IMAX-like imagery digitally. So we took digital cameras, and the interesting thing for me watching the film tonight is that this was big and beautiful, etc. But this film is designed for an 80-foot wide screen. So when it plays at the American Museum of Natural History, please come back and see it at 80 feet wide, and watch those little penguins. Put on your 3D glasses, watch those little penguins walk off the screen into your laps, and the kayaks come off, etc. This is still something of a work in progress. You may have noticed that the narrated by is blank because we're still negotiating with kind of an A-list person to lend his or her name to it, most likely her. So we're tinkering a little bit with it still, which is why I really appreciate this opportunity to share it and watch it myself in a big room and get some feedback.
Thanks for that. Yeah, we're happy to be able to get the opportunity to screen it here, although we would have loved to have screened it in 3D, which would have done it a lot more justice. But nonetheless, we're very grateful for you coming here tonight and allowing us to view this film. Our next speaker is Mr. Jamal Ahmad, who's the Deputy Director of UNEP New York. Before I hand over the floor to Mr. Ahmad, I'd like to provide our audience with a very short biography on him. Mr. Ahmad joined the Foreign Service of Pakistan in 1986. He's therefore an experienced Foreign Civil Service officer who's, over the past 28 years, worked in a number of different duty stations and has a rich experience of multilateral negotiations. These include his appointment as acting permanent representative to the UN agencies in Rome, the deputy permanent representative to UNEP in Nairobi. In addition, Mr. Ahmad has participated in numerous important intergovernmental meetings, including the World Summit on Sustainable Development in 2002, sessions of the UN General Assembly, the Commission on Sustainable Development, and the Governing Council and the Global Ministerial Environment Forum of UNEP. He was also the lead negotiator of the Group of 77 and China for climate change under Pakistan's chairmanship in 2007, culminating at the 13th Conference of the Parties to the United Framework Convention on Climate Change in Bali in 2007. He finally joined UNEP in 2008, which he represents today as the Deputy Director of the New York office. Mr. Ahmad, welcome. In light of the film we've just seen, could you just maybe tell us some thoughts that have crossed your mind and how some of the issues portrayed in that film relate to the work of UNEP?
Thank you very much, and good evening. I think I would begin by saying that I'm also mesmerized by the film that we have just seen by Mr. Bauermaster. It is a remarkable insight into part of our planet which from some of us, perhaps from me at least, remains unknown. It is an important part of our planet. And the film, I think, is doing justice to bring to the fore the issues, the impact that human activity, global warming, is having on it. I think global warming is responsible for many things. The film says that it is Antarctica on the edge, but I think if we don't act, many other things will also be on the edge. UNEP, which I represent here today, is an organization which is working in tandem within the UN system on environmental issues. Things which will relate to the work of Antarctic are also part of our work. We are partners in many other UN agencies for issues like energy efficiency, which is responsible also in the overall debate on global warming and climate change, on resource efficiency and forestations and deforestation and rising sea levels. We heard that many new islands are emerging in the Antarctic in the film. In other parts of the world, islands are going down because of the rising sea level. So what do we need to do? I think we need to join hands in partnership. The message that the international community has realized and is acting upon is to work in partnership and to take an integrated and holistic approach to sustainable development. It will not be a success story if we were to act on one part or on one issue alone. Yes, Antarctica is important, but so are small island states. So in that spirit, UNEP, in the UN version of the Earth Day, which we are celebrating today, on the World Environment Day on 5th June, will be marking under the theme of Small Island Development States, raise your awareness at the sea level, raise your action at the sea level. And in that sense, I think this film goes a long way in raising awareness about this important issue of global warming itself. The film also shows, and I pay tribute to Jan here, to bring together art with science, to bring adventurism, to partner with scientists and NGOs and the governments that are represented here today, that we can all work together to make this planet a safer place for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, I commend UNEP for jumping on board there as well with the World Environment Day and the event this year where you're tying in to small island developing states. Sea level rise is very much an issue for a lot of small island states today as a result of climate change, which in itself is an effective transition to our last speaker, Ambassador Sarir, the Permanent Mission of Maldives. Before I pass over to Ambassador Sarir, I would also like to provide you with a very brief biography about his background, as Mr. Sarir has a very impressive record as a diplomat. Ambassador Sarir was appointed to the Maldives mission as Ambassador Chargé d'Affaires in February 2012. A career Foreign Service officer, Ambassador Sarir has been in the Foreign Service since 1986, which is the same career length as you, Mr. Ahmad. And he has served as a desk officer in a variety of countries, including Sri Lanka, Kathmandu and Nepal, Brussels, London, and Bangladesh. Now, before we pass over to Ambassador Sarir, I would also like to point out a few key facts about the Maldives for our audience members who may or may not be aware of its particular geography. So the Republic of Maldives comprises 1,190 islands spread over 20 atolls and 900 kilometer square feet in the Indian Ocean. Of these 1,190 islands, just under 200 are inhabited with a population of slightly over 300,000 people. So occupying about 1,116 square miles, Maldives is therefore slightly more than 1.5 times the size of Washington, D.C. The highest point of the land is at 6 feet above sea level, but 80% of the country's area is only 3 feet or less above sea level. Ambassador, could you maybe please tell us a bit more about Maldives' vulnerability to climate change and sea level rise, and maybe some of the policies, issues that you have seen put in place in the country?
Thank you. Thank you, Mark, and good evening, everyone. I'm actually honored to be here celebrating the Earth Day, and let me offer you greetings on this important day. I also wish to thank the organizers for inviting me to this event. And many congratulations to John Bower Master and the production team on the Edge Antarctica, which was such a powerful message, so creatively presented, convey the message of the climate change. How fragile the Earth is, it raised eyebrows on where we are heading towards, and questions on what we can do to revert the process of climate change. There's so much that I can relate to from this particular video to where I come from, the Maldives. It is very much like Antarctica in terms of the how fragile that country is. It is certainly a vivid example of climate change in action. It is a microscopic laboratory, you could say, on the question of climate change. We see it happening every day. There is more floods, coastal erosion taking place, coral bleaching, sea level rise, depletion of fish stocks, changes in rainfall patterns, water shortages, high incidence of vector-borne diseases, so on and so forth. Everything that you talk about climate change is taking place in the Maldives. So it is very clear that Maldives is at the very frontline state on climate change impacts. And I wanted to show some of the pictures of the Maldives, which is here as I speak. So let me go into some of the statistics which Mark has already mentioned. It is an archipelago of 1,200 islands on a geographical territory of 99% sea and a mere 1% land. Over 80% of the total land area is less than 1 meter above mean sea level. 44% of the settlement footprints on all islands are within 100 meters of coastline, and 42% of the population and 47% of all housing structures being within 100 meters of coastline. So the impacts of climate change are felt by everyone, particularly the poor. Climate change is not merely an additional vulnerability, but it is the root cause of new vulnerabilities which is taking place in the country. When I was a child, I have not witnessed these changes that is taking place in the country. So obviously, it is recent. For the past few years, it's been taking place. When we look at the emerging vulnerabilities that I've just mentioned, over the past couple of years, more than 90 islands have been flooded at least once, and 37 islands have started to flood at least once a year. The freshwater lenses on many islands have eroded, and the recent floods have resulted in salinization of groundwater, leading to greater water scarcity in rural communities. There has been signs of coral bleaching throughout the country, throughout the islands, and with flooding and water salinity problems constantly threatening the human health and security. The Maldives has been successful in eradicating diseases such as malaria and polio, but due to the new vulnerabilities, we have seen high incidence of climate-sensitive diseases such as dengue fever. The vulnerability of climate change-related health risks is further compounded by local characteristics such as high level of malnutrition in children, accessibility and quality of healthcare, high population congestion, and low income levels. The beaches make up of 5% of our total land area and 97% of the inhabited islands, and almost half the resorts in the country have reported beach erosion. The Maldives has one of the most rich biodiversity in the as a country. It supports over 1,000 species of fish, 36 species of sponges, 420 species of corals, and 20 species of sharks, and 7 species of dolphins, and many other turtles and marine life. Tourism is our main economic sector, providing more than 28% of our GDP, but it's also 70% of the foreign exchange received by the country. But the loss of biodiversity and coastal erosion is directly impacting our largest industry. The fisheries is the second largest industry, which is also impacted by climate change. in reductions we have seen in regional fish stocks. We have our traditional eco-friendly method of pole and line fishing, which we have been used in since time immemorial. However, the annual catch by fishermen has steadily decreased in the recent past. So, what do we do as a nation for the response? It is very simple. We have been leading the way to mitigate the effects of climate change through a low carbon emission path and a creation of national biosphere reserves. We have established a biosphere reserve under the UNESCO auspicious, which we are also going for further coastal protection infrastructures. Then in terms of energy security, although the contribution of Maldives is negligible to the greenhouse gas emissions, however, Maldives currently relies heavily on fossil fuel, spending 35% of its national GDP on energy. But we are moving towards greater reliance on solar energy, phasing out of fossil fuels. And this is what we have wanted to showcase the rest of the small island states as a leader in this path. In terms of coastal protection, a small island country with very mere resources, there's very little that we could do. But what we have done is we have built tetrapods, a seawall surrounding the capital of the island, which has protected the island from storm surges and potential tsunamis, which was very clear shown during the Asian tsunami of 2006. That was very clear. But how we can expand into the other islands is not within the capacity of the country, because one particular island protection by such a wall it costs $50 million, and that's why we cannot really replicate to the 1,200 islands. But the Maldives' response has been that climate change is an issue that confronts the country, and therefore we have devoted all our synergies in the international front and as well as domestically on tackling climate change. We have accorded this issue as number one priority area in our foreign policy, as well as countries' security and territorial integrity issues, because we are a country which is at the brink of loss as a result of climate change. But how do we address this globally? We wanted to play that leading role within the UN system as well as internationally on how a country can raise its voice to showcase this issue, or whatever little resources the Maldives has. We have been raising this issue long before the issue of climate change was first even came to the fore as a global phenomenon. Maldives raised this issue way back in 1987 as environmental impacts that is confronting the country. We raised this issue, and as a result, there have been many developments over the past many years. The government is currently spending more than 27% of its national budget on building resilience. But that is not enough for a small country. How do we look at the long-term security of the country? That is, again, we are raising this issue in the international fora. We are heavily involved in the Small Islands Forum, AOSIS, as well as we are looking forward to the SIDS conference that is coming up in September in Samoa. We have been committed to all the negotiations that has taken place throughout the last two SIDS conferences, the third one coming up in Apia. But the question is, today the issue of climate change is more than an environment, more than science, and more than politics. It is fundamentally a human issue. It threatens human prosperity. It is already interfering with human rights, including the right to life, the right to take part in cultural life, and the right to use and enjoy property. We must now begin to acknowledge that it is fundamentally an issue of international security and stability as well. We are interconnected, and what affects the low will affect the high. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Yeah, I think it's very interesting for our audience just to see Maldives as a case study of the effects of climate change, if you don't mind me saying so. Just for the way it permeates, through to public health, it permeates through to the economy, to sort of all the different key sectors for a country. And I think most people tend to look at, the actual sea level rise in itself, but don't spend time to reflect on the human damage that can inflict. I think this is a good transition to open it up to the floor for any people who has a question to put it to our panel speakers. We should have some microphones to circulate through the room. So if you just like to raise your hand, we will get the microphone to you, and you can put your question to them. If you wouldn't mind just... Sorry, give me 2 seconds.
No, I was just going to say that I've spent a lot of time in the Maldives as well. And you couldn't find two places on the planet more opposite than Antarctica and the Maldives. Antarctica is covered at its height by 3 miles thick of ice. And as you said, much of the Maldives is a little more than 3 feet above sea level. At the height of human population in Antarctica, which is during January and February, there are fewer than 6,000 people on the entire continent of Antarctica. And the capital city of Male, the capital island of Male in the Maldives, is about 1.5 square miles by 1.5 square. It's about 1.5 square miles big, and I think 100,000 people live in 1.5 square miles. So yet the two places are linked, because as Antarctica changes, it's impacting the Maldives not in a fair respect. But I have traveled through the Maldives. I've spent time on the islands, and I ask people, how is your island changing? And they know, obviously, that they're losing coastline, that they know that the sea level is rising, but there is a lack of ability or access to information, because a lot of people don't really, in the West we suffer a little bit from a glut of information, but there are parts of the world where people they see it and it's right outside their front door or their back door, but they don't really know exactly why it's happening. So, more we can kind of talk about this, and not just amongst ourselves, the better.
Ambassador, I have a question. Maybe I missed it in your discussion of all the different elements you're thinking about with respect to potential coastal water rise. Is your government starting to think about discussions with other countries about total evacuation yet? And if, in case of a catastrophic event, which is somewhat predicted by all the models now, have you started discussions with other countries in terms of evacuating your population?
Thank you. Well, that's a very relevant question in the case of Maldives, because we were one of the first countries to raise that issue. Way back in 2008, our president raised that issue as an insurance policy. We should have an arrangement for relocation in the case of climate change. But later we have found out that it is not only a dream for countries, But now we see that there are much more vulnerable countries like Kiribati, for example, at the moment in Pacific, which is already negotiating with the nearby countries of Fiji and Australia on an arrangement for relocation. Thank God Maldives is not yet to that point, but then we have to find a way in which at a time if it goes to that point, Maldives has to look for that. But we are fortunate that that time has not yet come. But then the IPCC report that has come out recently does raise a lot of concerns that at some point that we thought we may not be able to see the Maldives going down during our lifetime, but then this report does suggest that it could be even during our lifetime. I mean, because for one particular example that they have mentioned was by 2100 there could be a 4 meter sea level rise. I mean, that's quite that will be quite devastating for a country like Maldives. Thank you.
This is so poignant. I just have to say, the film, John's film, incredible, and then to hear about what is the essential sinking of an entire country, and then the question being evacuation. Can we start talking about a whole different way that humanity could organize the civilization? I mean, I come from revolution books. I do not think, and I don't think anyone here could seriously talk about a plan B that could save the planet in our lifetime or our children's lifetime, short of revolution. And I know that's not on the docket here, or anywhere in the UN, or pretty much anywhere, but actually, can we talk about something that could actually address, in the very immediate sense that we are all now facing, a radical change for how people could live without profit in command that is driving all these incredibly criminal things that are going on, and are going to continue to go on, very rapidly, more than anyone ever thought. I mean, I have a plan. There is a plan. There is a strategy for making revolution and changing all of this. And I won't get into that right now, but, come talk to me. But please, can we talk about something radically different?
So is there a specific question to one of the panel members, or is it more of a comment per se that you're making?
I think it's a question to every human being on the planet,
sure,
including the planet, the
okay,
panel members.
I'll pass it over to Mr. Ahmad, who'd like to respond.
Yes, thank you. This is an interesting comment, and I would not respond to it, but I'll make my own comment. Yes, there is an alarming and dramatic level that we have seen, but then, as I mentioned briefly in my earlier comment, thanks to people like the film producer of this film, who is sitting with us, Mr. Baumaster, and others, the interaction between science and policy is gaining momentum. We are seeing more and more scientific evidence which is feeding into policies of the governments of the international community. The IPCC, if it was not for IPCC, it would have not made this statement. Maldives would have not known what is happening. We would have not known what is happening elsewhere in this planet on the global, as a result of the global warming, which is the result of human activity, which in turn will push us on the edge. So the whole discussion of sustainable development, the whole approach to sustainable development now, which is taking place in these very chambers these days for the last many months, and it will continue till 2015, the initiative by the Secretary General to convene a summit on climate change later this year, the conference on SIDS, which is happening next year, the conference on disaster risk reduction, which is happening in Japan, the climate change summit in France next year, all this together leads us to the thinking that you were referring to, that we need to think collectively, that we need to think responsibly. This morning there was a discussion in this very room on the living in, what was it, living in norm with, I'm forgetting the exact title, but there was a discussion on how we can live with nature and how we can adopt ourselves to the very principles of living on this planet while preserving the resources that we have inherited from our forefathers to leave it for our children.
Thank you. Any other questions? Again, if you have a question, just raise your hand. Okay. Well, I mean, in terms of going back to Mr. Bauermaster, I just had a personal question myself. You talk about the risk of natural resource extraction pending the end of the international treaty that's due to take place very, very shortly, that's currently protecting Antarctica. I was wondering if you could sort of explain to us what type of minerals lie beneath Antarctica, and sort of what is the attraction for these states that are looking to explore underneath that, and what potential effect that could have on the world should they do so. I just wanted to get more of an insight on that, if that's okay.
Well, you saw what happened as what is happening as the ice has retreated in the Arctic Ocean, right? There are 5 nations that border the Arctic Ocean. There are 8 nations that claim territories there, and as that ice disappears, everyone is racing to define who owns what. The Russians sent down the vice president of their Duma, Alexander Chilingarov, in a submarine, and he planted the Russian flag beneath the North Pole. So he could claim that, in fact, all of that land underneath the Arctic Ocean was in fact Russian. And you're seeing other efforts being duplicated. I mean, Canada is sending out naval ships in places where they never would have sent ships before. And that gives you some idea of what could happen in Antarctica. And we mentioned in the film, think about where Antarctica came from. You know, it broke off from the tip of South America and South Africa. Think of the mineral resources in both those nations, which ranges from fossil fuels, every imaginable fossil fuel, to precious minerals. Diamonds. You know, there's thought to be huge fields of diamonds in the continent under Antarctica. But it's been off limits for all these years because it's covered in up to 3 miles of ice. So no one's thought, and you couldn't put a drill rig off the coast of the peninsula because you've got 30-mile wide icebergs that would come and wipe out the drill rigs. But as technology changes and improves, especially that ability to drill along coastline and send kind of octopus-like tentacles out into the coastal shores there, you know, access to all that oil, especially that just offshore oil off that peninsula, is becoming increasingly possible. Now, it's not going to happen next year, but it could very well happen within the next 20 years, 30 years, 50 years. Every scientific base you go on in Antarctica, they're drilling. Ostensibly, it's for environmental purposes. They're drilling for ice cores. They're drilling to measure the impact of climate change, et cetera, which is all valid. But they're also drilling, trying to figure out technologically, how do we get through this ice to that good stuff underneath? And why are they trying to get to that good stuff underneath? It's because we, as a species, are rapacious. You know, we're at 7+ billion now, headed fast towards 9 billion. It's great to think that we're going to be able to power all of that additional 2 billion people, plus a burgeoning middle class in India and China with wind and solar, but that's not real. You know, we're going to continue for the short term to need fossil fuels. And there's a lot of coal and arguably a lot of oil in Antarctica and natural gas. So it's logical, as its ice disappears, nations will start fighting over who owns what. I mean, what happened in 2007 was you saw the map in the film where in going back to the 1930s, countries actually claimed pieces of Antarctica. 7 different countries, they made their pie slice claim, but then when the treaty was written in 1959 and signed in 1961, those claims were judged moot. Those don't count anymore. But if you go to Chile today, or if you've ever gone to Chile, and you buy a road map at a gas station and open up the map, it'll show on that map its slice of Antarctica. And they do that because it makes them bigger than Argentina. So those claims in the government's minds have never really gone away. In 2007, the British reclaimed the entire peninsula. Said actually, going back, 1930s, that's ours. When immediately Chile and Argentina said, well, actually, no, going back to 1940 something, that's ours. So now the three nations have all claimed the peninsula. And they did that so they could get on record so that when somebody starts going in there and digging resources, they can say, well, remember back in 2007, we claimed that, so that's ours. So I hope I stick around long enough to keep watching it, because I think it's a really fascinating look at how the world it will evolve in very short order.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, and I think most people who are present here for this screening probably agree with you as well, that they definitely don't want that to happen. They don't want that exploration to take place. And I think the work of the UN and the work of national countries themselves to promote the effects that climate change is having on countries and how we should definitely work to reverse that is helping to create that different shift in thinking, to maybe steer yourself towards a clean technology revolution or any other type of revolution that you want to call for that will mitigate and adapt to the effects of climate change. I think we've come to the end of our questions, unless there's any others coming from the floor. So first of all, I'd like to thank our panel participants who are here tonight. In particular, you, John, for sharing this film with us, which is a great platform for debate. Thank you all of you for attending tonight's event in commemoration of Earth Day. Please continue to demonstrate your support for environmental protection by raising awareness for this day, which has been going on since 1970. Given that we're sitting in the ECOSOC chamber of the UN, I thought it would be fitting to leave you with a quote from a previous head of state, Theodore Roosevelt. His quote is, "To waste, to destroy our natural resources, to skin and exhaust the land instead of using it so as to increase its usefulness, would result in undermining in the days of our children the very prosperity which we ought by right to hand down to them, amplified and developed." Thank you and good night.